Get back in the waiting area. This isn't a place for visitors." The ER nurse's words sliced through the controlled chaos of Columbia Presbyterian's trauma bay like a scalpel. Nurse Rachel Morrison's voice carried that particular tone, the one reserved for people who didn't understand hospital hierarchy, who didn't belong in clinical spaces. Dr. Amara Bennett stood motionless in her faded Columbia University hoodie and dark jeans. Her mother's medical file clutched against her chest. Her natural hair was pulled into a simple bun. No jewelry except a modest watch. No obvious markers of the authority she carried every single day in this very building. "Ma'am, did you hear me?" Rachel's voice rose, attracting attention from the nearby residents. "Family members cannot be in this area. You need to leave now. Have you ever been invisible in a place you built, where your expertise meant nothing because they couldn't see past your appearance?" The irony burned like acid in Amara's throat. This was her hospital, her emergency department, her protocols being followed by every person in this room. But right now, she was just another black woman in casual clothes, assumed to be lost, assumed to be breaking rules. "I need to speak with the attending about my mother's case," Amara said quietly, her voice carrying the controlled calm she'd perfected through 20 years of surgery. "Dorothy Bennett, admitted 4 hours ago with chest pain." Rachel's expression shifted from irritation to condescension. "Honey, the doctors are very busy saving lives. They'll update family when they have time. For now, you need to wait in the designated area like everyone else." The honey landed with deliberate weight. Amara recognized it immediately. The same diminutive language she'd heard throughout her career. The verbal reminder that some people saw her as less than, regardless of her credentials. But what Rachel Morrison didn't know was that in exactly 12 minutes, she would need Dr. Bennett to save a life. And the choice Amara would make in that moment would expose 15 years of systematic racism hiding behind professional protocol. A young resident named Kyle Peterson hurried past, barely glancing at the confrontation. "Rachel, we need you at Bay 3. Multi-vehicle accident incoming." "1 second," Rachel called back, then turned to Amara with barely disguised impatience. "Ma'am, I'm going to call security if you don't leave this area immediately." Amara's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the medical file. Inside were her mother's records. A 68-year-old black woman with a history of hypertension, who had presented with classic cardiac symptoms 4 hours ago, and was still sitting in the waiting room unexamined. "I'd like to review my mother's chart," Amara said evenly. "According to HIPAA regulations and family advocacy protocols, I have the right." "Oh, so now you're a lawyer?" Rachel interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess, you've done your research on Google?" The medical student observing nearby shifted uncomfortably. This was crossing lines, even for Rachel's notoriously short temper with families. Amara met Rachel's eyes with the same steady gaze she used before making the first incision in open-heart surgery. "I've done more than Google research. But if you'd prefer to check with Dr. Morrison about patient Bennett's status." "Dr. Morrison is in surgery," Rachel snapped. "And even if he wasn't, he doesn't take orders from family members who think they know better than trained medical professionals." Rachel Morrison had no idea she was talking to the doctor who had trained Dr. Morrison, the surgeon who had revolutionized cardiac protocols across the entire Northeast, the woman whose research had changed how emergency departments approached black female patients' cardiac symptoms. The trauma bay doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in, wheeling a gurney, carrying a middle-aged white man. Chest compressions in progress. 47-year-old male, witnessed cardiac arrest, down for 6 minutes, the lead paramedic shouted. No response to 2 rounds of epi. Rachel's face went pale. "Where's the attending?" "Still in surgery," Kyle called back. "And Dr. Williams is stuck in traffic. We're on our own for at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes. A lifetime when a heart has stopped beating. Amara watched the organized chaos unfold with the clinical eye of someone who had run hundreds of codes. The residents' compressions were too shallow. The intubation attempt was fumbled. The medication dosing was off protocol. The patient was dying. And everyone in this room was following exactly the wrong protocol for his presentation. Somebody page cardiology. Rachel shouted, her hands shaking as she drew up another dose of epinephrine. They're all in conference, a nurse called back. 20 minutes minimum. The patient didn't have 20 minutes. The monitor showed ventricular fibrillation deteriorating toward a systole. Death was 60 seconds away, maybe less. Amara made a choice. Sometimes justice requires breaking the rules you created. Stop compressions, Amara said, stepping forward with absolute authority in her voice. Rachel whirled around. I told you to leave. Security. But Kyle had frozen, something flickering in his eyes. Recognition? Uncertainty? Wait, isn't that— I don't care who she thinks she is, Rachel interrupted. Get her out of here before I have her arrested for interfering with patient care. The security guard, Marcus Williams, no relation, but the name coincidence would later seem prophetic, approached Amara with apologetic eyes. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. The monitor flatlined. He's in a systole, Kyle whispered. We're losing him. And that's when Dr. Amara Bennett did something that would change everything. She pulled out her hospital ID badge from her hoodie pocket. Not the visitor pass Rachel assumed she'd have. The attending physician badge with full access to every system, every room, every protocol in Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. But she didn't show it yet. Instead, she looked directly at Rachel Morrison and asked a question that would haunt the nurse for months. If I leave this room right now, are you prepared to explain to this man's family why you chose protocol over survival? What? Rachel's face flushed red. You have no right. The patient is hypothermic, Amara continued, her voice cutting through the chaos like she was presenting grand rounds. Look at his skin, the peripheral cyanosis pattern. The paramedic report said he was found in his car with the AC on maximum in August heat. Classic presentation of cocaine-induced hypothermic cardiac arrest. Kyle's eyes widened. Oh my God, she's right. The protocol is wrong, Amara finished. You're using the standard ACLS algorithm for normothermic arrest, but this patient needs heated saline, active rewarming, and calcium chloride before he'll respond to defibrillation. You have maybe 90 seconds before the window closes permanently. Rachel stared at her, brain trying to process how a random family member in a hoodie was diagnosing a complex cardiac emergency with precision that exceeded most attending physicians. But the real shock was still coming. Marcus, Amara said, turning to the security guard who had become very still. Please scan my ID badge on the reader. The guard hesitated, then took the badge Amara handed him. His face went chalk white as he read the display. Oh Jesus, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Dr. Bennett. I didn't recognize. Dr. Bennett? Rachel's voice cracked on the name.
That's impossible. Dr. Bennett is—
Standing right here, Amara said quietly, already moving toward the code card. And if you want this patient to survive, I suggest you start heated saline and active rewarming. Now. Kyle moved instantly. Yes, Dr. Bennett. Warming blankets and— No time, Amara interrupted, her hands already flying through the code card, with the muscle memory of thousands of procedures. Rachel, I need calcium chloride 1 gram IV push, sodium bicarb 50 ml, and warm normal saline for active core rewarming. Kyle, get me a central line kit and prep for internal defibrillation if this doesn't work. For a frozen moment, Rachel Morrison stood paralyzed, her brain trying to reconcile the casual clothes-wearing black woman she'd been dismissing with the legendary cardiac surgeon, whose name was literally on the door of the surgical wing 2 floors up, Dr. Amara Bennett, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, developer of the Bennett Protocol for cardiac emergencies, the surgeon who had personally trained half the cardiac staff in this building. Rachel, Amara's voice snapped like a whip. Patient care first, personal embarrassment later. Calcium chloride now. Rachel's hands moved automatically, years of training overriding the shock. She drew up the medication with shaking fingers, while Amara positioned herself at the patient's head. Resume compressions, Amara ordered Kyle. High quality, 2 inches deep, rate of a 110. And somebody get me the patient's core temperature. I'm betting it's under 94 degrees. 92.3. Another nurse called out, voice awed as she realized who was running the code. Perfect, Amara said grimly. Classic cocaine-induced hypothermia. His heart won't respond to standard drugs until we bring his temp up. Rachel, calcium now. Rachel pushed the calcium chloride, her face showing the dawning horror of what she'd done. Not just dismissing a family member, not just being rude to a visitor. She'd tried to remove the chief of cardiac surgery from a code the patient needed her expertise to survive. Bicarb, Amara commanded, her hands feeling the carotid pulse that was barely present. Then start the warm saline rapid infusion. Kyle, I need you to intubate now. His airway's compromised, and we need to control ventilation during rewarming. The resident moved with precision, clearly familiar with working under Amara's direction in the surgical suite. Tube secured, Dr. Bennett. Good. Bag at 12 breaths per minute. High flow oxygen. Amara watched the monitor, counting seconds in her head. Rachel, epinephrine 1 milligram now. Then we're going to try defibrillation again. Epi in, Rachel whispered, still looking like she might faint. Charging to 200 joules, Amara announced. Everyone clear. The shock delivered. The patient's body jerked. Nothing. Again, 300 joules. Another shock. The monitor jumped, then organized into a shaky rhythm. We have sinus tachycardia, Kyle breathed. Rate 140. BP returning. He's back, another nurse said in amazement. How did you? The Bennett protocol, Kyle explained to his colleagues, his voice filled with admiration. It's required reading in every ER in the country now. I never thought I'd see Dr. Bennett actually run a code in the ER. Amara continued working, stabilizing the patient with the calm efficiency of someone who had pulled thousands of patients back from death's door. Let's get him to the cath lab. I want a full cardiac workup, tox screen for cocaine and other stimulants, and core temperature monitoring every 15 minutes until he's above 96 degrees. Yes, Dr. Bennett, the team chorused. Everyone moving with practice coordination now that they understood who was directing them. Everyone except Rachel Morrison, who stood frozen in the corner, understanding that her career had just imploded in spectacular fashion. As the patient was wheeled away to the cath lab, the trauma bay fell into shocked silence. Medical students, residents, and nurses, who had witnessed the entire scene from admission to miraculous recovery, stood staring at the woman in the Columbia hoodie who had just saved a life while being threatened with arrest. Amara finally looked at Rachel Morrison, who had gone from flushed anger to ashen terror. Nurse Morrison, Amara said quietly, I believe we need to discuss your interaction with my mother's case. The 68-year-old black woman with chest pain who has been sitting in the waiting room for 4 hours without examination. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, soundlessly. And then, Amara continued, her voice still calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in the bay flinch. We need to discuss why you assumed a black woman in casual clothes couldn't possibly be a physician, why you threatened her with arrest rather than checking credentials, and why you were prepared to let a patient die rather than listen to someone you decided didn't belong in your emergency department. Kyle stepped forward, his face pale. Dr. Bennett, I didn't recognize you either at first, and I should have. I apologize. Kyle, you're a first-year resident who's been here 3 months and has never worked directly with me, Amara interrupted. Your hesitation is understandable. Nurse Morrison has been in this emergency department for 7 years. We've worked together on dozens of cases. The only thing that changed today was my clothing. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus, the security guard, cleared his throat. Dr. Bennett, I'm deeply sorry for Marcus. You were doing your job based on the information you were given, Amara said, her tone softening slightly. But I need you to file an incident report about what you witnessed here today. Everything. Because this isn't about one nurse's assumptions. This is about systematic bias in how we treat patients and families who don't look like what we expect medical professionals to look like. She turned to address the entire trauma bay. How many black families have been dismissed in this ER? How many women of color presenting with cardiac symptoms have been told they're overreacting? How many patients have died because we made assumptions based on appearance rather than evidence? The silence was deafening. But Amara Bennett wasn't finished, because in the next 5 minutes, She would transform this moment of personal vindication into institutional change that would ripple across the entire hospital system. Dr. Richard Morrison, the ER attending who had been in surgery, arrived back in the trauma bay to find his entire staff standing in shocked silence around Amara Bennett. "Dr. Bennett," he said, clearly surprised to see the chief of cardiac surgery in his ER in casual clothes. "I didn't realize you were here. Is everything—" "Richard, we need to talk," Amara said, "about the patient I just coded, about my mother who's been waiting 4 hours for cardiac evaluation, and about the systematic issues in your emergency department that nearly killed a man and did endanger my mother's life." Morrison's confident expression faltered. "I don't understand." Amara pulled out her phone and opened a video file. "This is body camera footage from Marcus's security equipment. Hospital policy requires all security interventions to be recorded. Would you like to watch what happened when I tried to advocate for my mother's care?" She played the video. Morrison's face went from confusion to horror as he watched Rachel Morrison's interactions with Amara, heard the dismissive language, saw the threat of arrest. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I had no idea." "That's exactly the problem, Richard. You have no idea how often this happens, how many families are dismissed, how many advocates are silenced, how many patients receive substandard care because of assumptions based on race." Amara walked to the computer terminal and pulled up statistics she'd been tracking for months. In the past year, this emergency department has had a 43% longer average wait time for Black patients with cardiac symptoms compared to white patients with identical presentations. Black women specifically wait an average of 58% longer. Morrison stared at the data. "That can't be right. We follow the same triage protocols for everyone." "The protocols are fine," Amara interrupted. "The problem is implicit bias in how those protocols are applied. My mother presented with classic MI symptoms 4 hours ago. If she had been a white woman in her 60s with chest pain, how long would she have waited for ECG and cardiac enzyme testing?" The answer was visible on Morrison's face. "Minutes, not hours. I want my mother seen immediately by cardiology," Amara continued. "I want her full cardiac workup expedited. And then, Richard, you and I are going to redesign your entire emergency department intake protocol." "Of course," Morrison said quickly. "Anything you need. And Nurse Morrison will be part of the solution," Amara interrupted. "Because this isn't about punishing one person for doing what the system taught her to do. This is about fixing the system." Rachel Morrison stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Dr. Bennett, I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I just assumed." "You assumed I was just another difficult family member," Amara finished gently, "because I didn't look like what you expect a cardiac surgeon to look like, and you treated my mother's case with less urgency because she didn't seem important enough to prioritize." "I never meant to be racist," Rachel whispered. "I would never." "Rachel," Amara said, and her voice carried the weight of 20 years fighting these exact battles. "Most racism in healthcare isn't intentional. It's not cross-burning hatred. It's the subtle assumptions that Black patients are exaggerating pain, that Black families are being difficult when they advocate, that Black women in casual clothes can't possibly be surgeons." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The question isn't whether you meant harm. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to recognize your biases and change your practice." And in that moment, Rachel Morrison had a choice. The same choice every person in that emergency department now faced: to defend their intentions or to examine their impact. 3 hours later, Dorothy Bennett sat in a monitored cardiac care bed. Stable after emergency angioplasty revealed a 90% blockage in her LAD artery. The cardiologist had been stunned she'd waited so long for treatment with such obvious symptoms. "Mama, I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier," Amara said, holding her mother's hand. "Baby, don't you apologize for their mistakes," Dorothy replied, her voice weak but firm. "You've been fighting this battle your whole career. I'm just sorry you had to fight it for me too." Amara smiled sadly. "Actually, Mama, I think what happened today might finally give me the leverage to make real changes. Sometimes the system only listens when the discrimination is too obvious to ignore." Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital CEO. Emergency board meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Your presence requested. Let's talk about systematic changes in patient care protocols. Another text from the state medical board. Dr. Bennett. We received Marcus Williams' incident report. We'd like to discuss potential statewide protocol revisions based on your recommendations. And finally, from Kyle, the resident. Dr. Bennett. Thank you for showing us what real advocacy looks like. Half the residents in the ER want to enroll in your bias training program. Can we get approval to make it mandatory? The transformation had begun. One code at a time. One conversation at a time. One uncomfortable moment of truth at a time. 6 months later, the auditorium at Columbia Presbyterian was packed with medical staff from emergency departments across the Northeast. Dr. Amara Bennett stood at the podium, her presentation slides showing the dramatic changes implemented since that day in the trauma bay. The Bennett protocol, she explained, isn't just about cardiac arrest management. It's about recognizing that bias kills patients just as surely as blocked arteries do. On the screen, statistical evidence of reduced disparities in wait times, improved outcomes for Black cardiac patients, and testimonials from families who had experienced the new patient advocacy system. Nurse Rachel Morrison, Amara said, gesturing to the back of the room where Rachel sat with a group of her colleagues, has become one of our most effective bias trainers. She shares her story with brutal honesty, helping other healthcare workers recognize how subtle assumptions can have life or death consequences. Rachel stood, her voice strong despite the difficulty of repeatedly reliving her mistakes. I thought I was a good nurse who treated everyone equally. Dr. Bennett showed me that good intentions mean nothing if the outcomes are discriminatory. Now I spend half my time teaching other nurses to recognize what I couldn't see in myself. The audience applauded. The patient I coded that day, Amara continued, survived because I refused to accept that my appearance determined my expertise. My mother survived because I had the knowledge and position to demand appropriate care. But how many patients don't survive because their families don't have those advantages? She clicked to her final slide, a photo of Dorothy Bennett, healthy and smiling, standing outside the new Patient Advocacy Center that had been established with emergency funding after the incident became public. This is why we do this work, Amara said. Not for recognition, not for vindication, but because every patient deserves care based on their symptoms, not on assumptions about who they are or where they come from. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. As the conference ended, Amara found Rachel Morrison waiting outside the auditorium. Dr. Bennett, Rachel said, I wanted you to know that the hardest part of sharing my story isn't the embarrassment. It's the guilt of knowing how many patients I might have failed before you forced me to confront my biases. Amara studied the nurse, who had transformed from antagonist to ally. Rachel, the fact that you feel that guilt means you've actually changed. Too many people protect their egos instead of examining their practices. I found something, Rachel continued, pulling out a folder. Patient records from my first year in the ER. I tracked my own average response times and triage decisions across different patient demographics. She handed the folder to Amara. The statistics inside were damning. Consistent patterns of longer wait times, more skeptical documentation, and lower priority triage for Black patients. I did this for 7 years, Rachel whispered. How do I make that right? Amara put a hand on her shoulder. You already are. By refusing to hide from it, by teaching others, by changing your practice every single day going forward. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about transformation. 1 year later, the Bennett Protocol had been implemented in 14 emergency departments across 12 states. Patient wait time disparities had decreased by an average of 62%. Cardiac mortality rates for Black women had dropped by 38% in participating hospitals. Dr. Amara Bennett received the National Medical Association's Humanitarian Award for her work in systematic bias reduction. In her acceptance speech, she shared a statistic that made the medical community pause. Before the protocol implementation, Black women experiencing heart attacks were 42% more likely to die before receiving treatment compared to white women with identical symptoms. Today, that gap is closing, not because we discovered new medical techniques, but because we finally acknowledged that bias was killing our patients. She paused, looking out at the audience of thousands of medical professionals. The day Rachel Morrison threatened to have me arrested for trying to save lives, I had a choice. I could have used my position to destroy her career. Instead, I chose to destroy the system that taught her those biases in the first place. On the screen behind her, a video played. Rachel Morrison, teaching a room full of nurses how to recognize implicit bias in patient triage. Kyle Peterson, now a second-year resident, leading a discussion on equity in emergency medicine. Marcus Williams, the security guard, speaking to a hospital administration conference about the importance of verification before assumption. These are the faces of change, Amara said. Not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to be uncomfortable, to examine themselves, to choose growth over defensiveness. The transformation was complete. From one moment of discrimination to nationwide systematic change, from personal hurt to institutional healing, from one surgeon's quiet dignity to a revolution in how medicine treats its most vulnerable patients. 3 years later, Dorothy Bennett celebrated her 71st birthday, surrounded by her family in perfect health. The blockage Amara had discovered that day had been the only major cardiac event she'd experienced, caught in time because her daughter refused to accept substandard care. "Tell the story one more time, Mama," Amara's daughter requested. 8-year-old Zoe loved hearing about the day Grandma Dorothy's life was saved. "Well, baby," Dorothy began, "your mama walked into that hospital wearing an old hoodie, and they treated her like she didn't belong. But she didn't get angry. She didn't yell. She just quietly saved a life. Saved my life, and changed everything." Zoe looked up at Amara. "Were you scared, Mama?" Amara thought about that question. "You know what, sweetheart? I wasn't scared. I was tired. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of fighting the same battles. But mostly, I was determined. Because sometimes being quiet and competent is more powerful than being loud and angry." Her phone buzzed. Another hospital requesting Bennett protocol training. Another medical school wanting to add her bias recognition curriculum. Another life saved because someone finally paid attention to evidence instead of assumptions. The revolution continues. One patient, one provider, one moment of choosing equity over ego, one quiet victory at a time.